There is a race going on right now to build data centers, and AI on this slice of fresh bread. Welcome to Fresh Bread, a podcast ministry of Grace Bible Church, Gainesville, with Pastor Brandon and Pastor Keith. Well, thanks for clicking on Fresh Bread. Fresh Bread, where we're bringing the truth of God's Word to a starving world. Fresh Bread, podcast 149. And what we're going to do today is we're going to look at something that I had no idea. I've heard about them, but I had no idea that these were being built at a record pace. There is like a race to get all of these data centers completed. And so we're going to look at it. What are these data centers? They're ginormous. They're huge. And what are they holding? Like, what's in there? Why is data take up giant space? I always thought a chip on a computer was like the size of an eye of a needle, and that kind of a chip could hold millions of bits of data. So I'm you can tell I'm not a computer guy, but that's what we're going to address today. I'm Pastor Keith, by the way. He's Pastor Brandon on the other side of the microphone, and we're going to look at data centers. Pastor Brandon, what's with all these data centers that they're building all over the United States?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's a lot of different things to look at when it comes to these, and why they are coming to exist, and even what the impact is going to be, in terms of power consumption and all that. And so I guess, obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, but the data centers are being built because we are generating more data than ever. And the reason why that is because, a lot of reasons, but things like Facebook, things like X or Twitter, YouTube, all these services are that constantly recording, and so that there's data that's being produced by these things 24/7, and that data has to go somewhere, and so that the data center has been over the past probably 10 years. I don't know if that's exactly true, but I've known about them for probably 5 or 6 years. So I don't know how much before that, they were, that was kind of when it was fairly new, but they exist because they need to have storage for all of these, all this data. And so it's interesting because you mentioned, these chips are supposed to be, small chips can carry all this data, and, why do we need these data farms, if you will? And the reason is because that it's not just the storage itself; it's all the infrastructure that goes around it. Because it's it takes electricity to run them, right? So it takes a tremendous amount of power to run these things, and then it also takes cooling, which takes a large amount of water, and so you have to have the infrastructure around this data center that can make that stuff happen. And you also have to have the infrastructure of actually just getting the data in and out, like being connected. And so, I mean, these things are incredibly complex. It's very interesting to me that I've actually, and I don't know if some people probably do know this, but most probably don't, but I've actually been involved in the construction of a couple of data centers several years ago, and sort of indirectly still involved, very indirectly at this point. But yeah, I was involved in designing one. And one of the things that really struck me when I was designing, I say designing the data center, designing really the roof and the floors for the data center, because the product that I was working on was part of that structure. And so when I was involved with it, I had the plans for the data, like how this thing is built. And it's interesting to me that it really ended up being basically like it's integrated into it's almost like it's plugged into the earth. I mean, and it's sucking all these resources, whether it's power or water, it's sucking all these resources to be able to store all this data, and that it's able to not only just store it, and because it's not static. I mean, it's not a static thing. There's always data in, there's data out, and And so it's just these things are just massive. I mean, that's what I know about them. And I do know what you're saying for sure, that the construction of these things is ramping up, and we're building more and more of them. And it's becoming a major political issue, because, they're quote unquote necessary for what we're doing with AI and with computing. But at the same time, they have an impact environmentally, they have an impact on infrastructure. And so there's definitely, I think most people, most people don't want them in their backyards. And as a matter of fact, there's one that has been proposed, I think, in Alachua. And I think that the people are pretty much against it. So we'll see if it comes to fruition. So I'm kind of wandering here and not really, I'm just kind of throwing things off the top of my head, but hopefully that gives a little bit of an oversight.
Yeah, you're wandering and you're not even Jewish. But so I'm very un-technology guy. I mean, I do use a computer and stuff, but so is this, are these data centers, are what we're talking about? Is this the cloud that they always talk about? Not the clown, but the cloud. Is that the cloud?
Yeah, I mean, the cloud is just a term that's been, used. It's more of a commercial term that, there's a cloud. But yeah, that's exactly. I mean, the cloud is just made up of a bunch of CPUs or GPUs that basically store data, and so that was when you start hearing about the cloud. That was really the genesis for the data center. Where these things became more and more ubiquitous.
So why? And I know we talked about it. The research I did on it, when I listened to some of these guys talking about it, they talk about the reason they're doing this, the data centers, is because of AI, Grok, Snapchat. You mentioned Facebook, Amazon, all this stuff. Like, here's what I heard, and tell me if this is right. And you may not know, but it's somebody maybe who's listening can tell us in church sometime. But I've heard this. In Utah, they are proposing to build a data center that is 62 square miles as large. 62 square miles. Why do we need all of these? They're actually all pretty big. Is it because there's that many people are using all this stuff online? Is it just because of the internet, and there's just nowhere, the cloud is not big enough to hold, like one data center is not big enough? How big do they have to be?
Yeah, I tried to say this in my monologue, but yeah, I mean, our lives are literally being recorded at this point, right? Every aspect of our life is literally online, and everything that we do generates more and more and more and more data. I mean, I'll just tell you this. I mean, if you have Google on your phone, then Google is recording everywhere you go in real time. And so you can literally go back and you can look at Google, and they have the data that says exactly where you've been, and what you were doing, at 10 o'clock Thursday morning. And so, that everything that we're doing is being recorded at this point. And, that's where all the data, I mean, that's the data that's being generated. But not to mention, now you have AI that's generating even more data.
So everything that we do, why is that stored though?
Well, because it's valuable to somebody.
I mean, that's where I'm confused. Like Facebook, I don't do Facebook, but from what my wife does, it's just people posting photos of their lives, and I don't know why people would want to save that, in a cloud at a data center. But I guess you said there's a reason for it.
Well, I mean, it's not necessarily a good reason. It's all right. It's not necessarily it could be for nefarious reasons that they're doing it, but. And that's actually the big concern, that's out there. It's interesting because I'll give you an example of something that happened to me just the other day, and I don't think is a coincidence. And going back to even what I was talking about all this data being farmed, that's there. And it's interesting because I was at a coffee shop with my daughter and just walked in, and there was a guy there that is a local pastor whom I've had contact with a couple of times in the past 5 years. And so I saw him there, and I didn't even, he was on the other side of the restaurant. I didn't even say anything to him. I, ordered my drink, and Chloe and I left, my daughter. And, didn't think anything of it other than, it was kind of interesting to see him there. And then the next day I was on Facebook, and he pops up, And so I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that Facebook knew that both of us were in the same location, right? And so that he popped up because Facebook knows that we've had contact before. That's not good. I mean,
that's a little creepy.
Yeah, but pursuant to what we're talking about here, it is a situation where those things are generating tons of data that's constantly being stored for future use. Part of the reason why Facebook would be doing it is because they do ads. And so, it wouldn't surprise me. Actually, it's funny because there was a medical establishment that I went to a few weeks ago. And right after I went there, I started getting ads for this company. And so, they're using that data in order to advertise and sell advertising. And so, that's something we've dealt with in the past. I mean, there's always advertising on, you watch Saturday morning cartoons and it was advertising. And so, cereal boxes or cereals or whatever, advertising that was there. But the problem is that it seems to be going beyond that. Because it's being, literally everything is subject to be recorded at this point. I don't know that everything is being recorded. Some people say we probably have gone to that point because we all have smartphones, we all have smart TVs, we all have, so conversations even within your house are potentially being recorded. So yeah, but that all produces data, and that's what's, part of the reason is what's driving these data centers.
Well, I think we've all experienced the fact that let's say you need a lawn care company, and so you scroll Google, and then for the next week, that's all you're going to see on your computer as lawn care commercials, right? Or pizza. Like you mentioned to your wife, hey, let's have pizza tomorrow night, and then all of a sudden, boom, you're just inundated with pizza places. Yep. So it's listening, and it is doing that.
It's absolutely doing that. Yeah. We've definitely got a couple of guys that would know more about this than we do. But yes, I'm absolutely convinced that they're listening and they're using that to target us.
So all that is part of what's being stored in these data centers.
Yes.
So I looked up, I guess the first question would be, I guess you answered it. We do need a digital infrastructure, right? Because of all the stuff that's going on. This way, it's a medical records are available. Everything's online.
Every medical record, your driving records,
financial history,
legal documents,
your education,
financial education. Yeah.
All that stuff is good. That's good that they have all that, right?
Well,
like doctors.
I guess that's relative. Is it helpful? Can the connectivity that we have, is it something that makes life easier? Yeah, for sure. And in that sense, it's good, and so, as an example, if I go to a doctor, and they have access to my records, hopefully they're more likely to catch something that, maybe the other person missed, or maybe has bearing on why I'm there. And, maybe they can catch those things, that they can get that history. AI is going to make that even more so, and, able to do that, because AI is going to be able to analyze those records and let that doctor know, that's you're at that. This is the history, and this is the things to pay attention to. And so yeah, in that sense, it's a good thing because it helps us. It's like any other technological advance that we've ever had. When the tractor came along, it took, the tractor took jobs away from people who were pulling plows behind a horse, but or the ox or whatever. But the trade-off, or the good part about it is that that there's less labor that's needed to do the same amount of work, or to do way more work. And so technology always has a positive and negative, and it's no different with the technology that we're seeing, that's creating all this data, is that there's always a positive for it. There's always reason to do it, but there's always a trade-off as well. And the trade-off is that, that it could be used for nefarious reasons, things that aren't good for us.
So yeah, and I think what we're gonna get into a little bit more of the AI and what's coming. But it's interesting that the reason these data centers are being built so rapidly is that the explosion of AI is just beginning. Like they say, this 2026 is the beginning, and like 2027, 2028, we're going to see this explosion. So there's a race to build these things. And I was just going to run through, I think you mentioned some of the good and bad of them. And the good, I just was looking this up, what people would consider good about building these data centers is they pay a lot of property taxes. And so they're saying that these buildings, these ginormous data centers, they buy all this land and they build this big center, and then they pay a lot of property taxes, which goes to the local schools, which makes the schools better, which makes the kids smarter. So that's a good thing. So hopefully everyone else's property taxes comes down, but I don't know if that's true.
Well, Florida is actually talking about partially doing away with property taxes, but that's a side note.
No, I've heard that if your house is under 200 or 250,000.
Well, basically the homestead exemption is rising to 250,000, but eventually it's supposed to rise to a point where it's unlimited. So yeah, it potentially could.
Yeah, another good thing for these data centers is there's more storage. There's a lot more storage available for the cloud, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And also politicians become and these high tech guys become more wealthy. They get more and more money from that, which then they can create more and more stuff for us. So that's good.
Theoretically, yes.
The bad part about it is, you mentioned it, what they do is they suck a lot of electricity and a lot of water. And,
yes.
And so I've heard many people, I've watched a lot of videos where people who live near them say their electric bill has gone from $200 a month to $450 just because they're there and they're sucking it all. So, and another thing is that they're hurting the environment, which is interesting when you talk about the global warming people or the climate change people. They don't seem to care that these things are emitting all kinds of bad things.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not an expert that way as to environmental impact. I have heard that noise pollution is a big issue, that there are people that are even live several miles from these things and they're hearing the buzz all the time, when in their homes and in their yards. And it's drowning out even the birds and the, nature. And so, I don't think we fully understand the effect of something like that. But then also the water that goes in to cool these things, that water comes back out and is, that has been contaminated. It's been warmed up and is now has to go back into the environment some way somehow. And so we don't. I don't know if anybody knows fully the impact that has, but it can't be nothing, right? And like you say, people are strangely quiet about it. Those who are environmentalists are strangely quiet about the issues there with noise pollution. The other thing I've heard is light pollution, that these things are emitting a glow that can be seen from miles around.
Yes, I also heard there's like a low frequency wave or something that you can actually feel in your chest if you live close enough to it.
Oh, wow.
That I'm just saying there's a lot of health issues that
we have no idea for sure.
And that's the part that gets me baffled, because they're fast tracking these things all over the place without even really researching this. And why can't they put them out in Area 51 or in the desert somewhere to get it away from people? But they're building them, like these companies, these data center guys, whoever are building them, are buying up land, and they're actually forcing people to move, and they're taking their land and they're building them all over the place. And the thing that I've heard too is that President Trump took the initiative, and he is now fast-tracked all this stuff. Like he is now the final say on how they and when they get built or how they get built, something like that I've heard. So, and I've heard him talk about he's fast-tracking these things. They want these built, and these are all being built. They should be done in the next 4 or 5 years. And we still don't really know how this is going to affect the environment, which is really strange.
Yeah, it's interesting because Donald Trump has kind of become a guy that's basically a technocrat. He's a guy that I think has really dove into this, the technological advances. And Elon Musk is another one that's out there that's really high-powered guy that really is pushing in that direction, thinking that technology is the answer, right? That all the things that are causing problems for man, that technology is what's going to fix that. And I think that idea is what is driving these men. And and I'm not 100% comfortable. And I'd still would say, and we talked about it before, I still would say Trump was a better alternative than what we had, with Kamala Harris or Joe Biden. But at the same time, at the same time, Donald Trump has his issues, and one of those potentially is that he's pushing in that direction. That technology is the answer to all of man's ills, or at least it seems like he's going in that direction.
Which is interesting. It brings us to the next part that we want to talk about, which is AI and how this is going to change the world. I mean, we actually heard about it. When did we first hear about AI? Last year, 2 years ago?
Yeah, I don't know. It's funny. I always go back and think about when I first heard about certain things, and probably a couple of years ago.
And they talked about it, how it's going to make your life so much easier. And then it sort of came on, and Google just went to it. Now you have the option of either doing an AI search or a regular search, and sometimes it just pops up AI search. So that's about the most AI I've used. I have not used Gronk. Have you used Gronk? That's
Gronk.
Another one. Gronk. I thought it was Gronk, the football player.
Gronkowski.
Yes, that's who I thought it was. But yeah, and I don't use Snapchat and all these things either, but I guess that's all AI. But what they're saying is, anyway, by the end of this year, everything's going to be mostly AI, and it's going to continue to advance. And so they're building these data centers because they need the storage. This is all coming. But here's my question to you: is again, as we look at this AI, you talked about, going back in time. If you go back to the Industrial Revolution, that was something that saved man's physical. It was a physical saving of muscles, like a human muscle. The machines were going to do the work for us, but we still came up with ideas and things and how to do it. What AI, they say, is going to do is intellectually, it's going to think for us. So now we don't have to do anything physically or mentally. That these things are going to start doing all this for us. And my question, I think we've talked about this before, is, to me, this doesn't sound like a really good idea, because what we're going to do, we're opening the door to AI taking the jobs that everyone else would take, right? You talk about, you're an engineer, you're designing things, and now they talk about ASI, which is artificial super intelligence. They talk about AGI, which is artificial general intelligence. And AGI, they say, is able to create. It can actually make art and music. It can look for cures of diseases and things like that. It's that smart. And then artificial super intelligence is like the smartest brains in the world. It'll just absorb all of that and be million times smarter than they are. And it'll be able to design buildings and design bridges and all this stuff. So all these people are out of work, and I think we've already talked about even fast food restaurants and stores, and soon it'll be AI and it'll be robotic. And what I'm trying to ask, and now it's a long question, is where do we in the future look in 5 years from now, if all this stuff takes off? What are people going to do for jobs? I don't really understand where that's going to go. Do you?
Yeah, well, I don't either. I mean, I feel like in some ways this is new territory. I mentioned advances in the past. I mean, like the tractor. There were people who lost their jobs because of the tractor. There were people who lost their jobs because of the cotton gin. There were people who lost their jobs because of the combine. And so, but what happened is that labor got reallocated to other things. And so, it definitely affected the generation that was going through it, because, if you were someone who picked cotton, so to as an example, and these technologies come along, and now all of a sudden you don't need that labor, and now all of a sudden it's automated. You lost your job. And if you were a telegraph operator in 1900, you probably you'd lost your job because of the telephone, right? Mm-hmm. And so but that's happened throughout history. I mean, the regular telephones. I mean, almost nobody has a regular telephone anymore, right? Because the smartphone is taking it over. And so there's always going to be people who lose out in those advances, and that labor gets reallocated to other things. And a lot of people have argued that AI is going to be the same exact thing, that yes, there are going to be people who are affected in their lifetimes, but eventually it'll balance out, and there'll be people who, that there will be other things that they do. It'll generate other jobs. And, I think that remains to be seen. I don't know if that's going to be the case or not. And I don't think that that's the reason why we should be afraid of it. because that's something that's happened throughout history. But on the other hand, there are definitely reasons why we should not fear it, because God is sovereign over all this, and so he's not being taken taken by surprise by any of this. He's got a plan that is going to go through no matter what. So we don't need to be fearful as Christians, but at the same time, just understanding what's going on, and I don't think that that we have to fear that people are not going to be able to do something. And some people, Elon Musk is talking about, basic income, universal basic income that would pay people. And, and perhaps that's something I just don't know, but I don't like the trajectory this is all on, quite frankly, but it doesn't surprise me because we know that that's the direction it's going to go in the end. None of this is taking us by surprise because we've read the Bible.
And that we'll get into that, how this fits in with the end time scenario and all that. That this is something that you and I, who have been around a while, when we were young, we heard that somehow, some way, there is going to be a guy who's going to be able to control all the everything, and we just kind of said, well, how do you do that? And now we're on the doorstep of this actually happening and taking place. So it is amazing. I'm glad you brought up Eli Musk to talk about that universal income, because I've heard many of these guys on other podcasts talking about the men who are kind of in the background of the AI movement. They are all saying that, yes, there will be a time where no one will have to work anymore because AI is doing everything, and there's just nothing but free time. So I'm not happy about that, because I like to golf, and I'm not crazy about more people on the golf course. But I wonder if AI can, take care of that. But that's if nobody's working and everyone's getting an income. I just don't know how that can be a good thing, because we've talked about it. The Bible talks about, we were made to work. We were made to do something.
Yeah, work is not part of the curse. Work was actually prior to the curse, and so work is actually a good thing. God put Adam in the garden to cultivate and keep it, and so God gave him, a job before the fall, and so to think that we can somehow not have people working, that I can't even imagine the issues in society that would come by people having all this free time. that doesn't sound good to me. That sounds like that there's a lot of opportunity for evil.
Yes, maybe we should build more golf courses now.
Yeah,
why wait time?
I think that's the least of our worries if that happens.
No, Well, I've also heard him talking about the artificial general intelligence. That's the next level, and then artificial super intelligence. They're actually talking about being able to cure everything, and then therefore these guys actually believe they'll be able to cure death. That there will be no more death. That people will be able to live forever. And I like we've talked about it. I don't know how long does God let this go on? Number one, and number two, we are living in a fallen world. We are all fallen humans, and these are fallen humans who are unleashing this, opening this door that nobody really knows where it's going to go.
Yeah, we're almost living in a sci-fi movie now. You were asking about when we first heard of AI. I would say Star Trek. That Star Wars. You had R2-D2 and C-3PO that had some sort of artificial intelligence. And so, you hear about those things in sci-fi, but now it's coming to fruition. Like it's actually happening, which is kind of, it's bizarre world when it comes to, and I think about my life and how much things have changed. And we've talked about that before, how much technology has completely changed everything.
Glenn Beck does his homework on this stuff, and he did a really good podcast about all this, or one of his specials, and he said that, he said this before, but I agree with him. He did say you will not recognize our world in 2030, like in 4 years from now. It's going to be so different, and it's just not going to be the same. And he's saying it's one of those leaps again when like the telephone was invented or television, and then all of a sudden it just booms, like it just goes nuts. And it will be interesting to see how it goes. And I do feel sorry for young people today. I just don't know as far as jobs and things like what they're going to end up doing if this continues. Like we just talked about, like my dad would always say, they always need ditch diggers. And I was always had a strong back. And so, but now I've heard people say, well, machines will be doing that. in the future. And the fast food, you start out at your local McDonald's or something, working in a fast food restaurant. Well, that's all going to be technology will be running that now. Like you go in and you touch the screen and you order your French fries, and the machine does it, and it pops up and brings, I don't know, robots or whatever it is that's coming. It just sounds so futuristic, but we are on that doorstep of things like that coming true, which, like you said, and like we saw in the movies, it's starting to happen.
Yeah, so, I mean, that we are living what seems like a sci-fi movie in my mind, in terms of where, based on what I've seen in the past, in sci-fi movies, and now it's coming to fruition, like in real life. I mean, you mentioned, there's some restaurants that have robots that bring the food out. And so where the technology is already there, in terms of, it's just a matter of implementation at this point.
Yeah. And will things, like we talk about, knowledge increases, I think it's now every 13 months. Will that, with AI and stuff, will that start like every...
I think it goes exponential.
Every week.
Yeah. Like you get to a point where I think it goes exponential from here. So, I think that's what Glenn Beck is talking about, why we won't recognize the world in 2030, because it is going to go exponential. And, if it stays on the same trajectory it's on, we are going to see some massive changes in the next, 5 or 6 years.
So we would, as Christians, we see all of this as has been foretold in God's word, right? This is nothing that really should surprise anyone or surprise Christians, but it is amazing how quickly it came.
For sure. In one sense, I'm surprised, not surprised. Like it's something we've talked about that for years, that, the Antichrist is going to rise, and, the tribulation is coming, and all these things are falling into place. And then, we've all talked about it, but I think that what we're seeing today is so far beyond what we could have imagined even, 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago. We're in a different world than we were when you and I started seminary, back in 2013.
Yeah, it's amazing. When I was young, remember when the barcodes came out and people would scan stuff, that people thought that, okay, that's Antichrist. And that was, I don't know how many years ago. That's got to be 40 years ago. And again, technology wasn't moving as fast. It kind of went slower and slower. And then all of a sudden now we're just exploding to all of this stuff going on. And what's interesting is when you look at these data centers, there's a race to who can build them the fastest and get it done. So they are the first ones to have that power. And then it's interesting to see that one man is going to, I don't know if it's going to be Eli Musk or whoever, but one man is going to have that power to control buying and selling and all this stuff. He's going to know everything, have all the information about Brandon Phillips at his fingertip that he wants. And it's just, it just seems so impossible 50 years ago that could even happen in our lifetime. And we thought, this might be like 300 years in the future or whatever, but it's coming so quickly, and it's kind of exciting. It's like what our friend Spencer Smith always says, things are looking so good because things are looking so bad. And we know we're getting near the end of...
Yeah, none of this is it's surprising in one sense because we're actually living it, actually seeing it, but it's not surprising in the sense of you read the scripture, you read Revelation, and it talks about the system, that will be built up, and talks about, the Antichrist and the false prophet, and, all that they do, and the two witnesses that are, seen throughout the world. We're seeing these things come to fruition in real life, that we see we haven't seen those things actually happen, but we're seeing the things that could lead to that. And so it's just we just live in very, very interesting times that way. And the Lord, it seems like the Lord is right around the corner, his return, but we never know. He may tarry for a long time.
Well, it's interesting that, that could be, but we do see things that are pointing to an intersection, that they're all kind of coinciding, and it's coming quickly. A lot of things are happening that the Bible said would happen, and we may be seeing the foundation being laid of all that, but it's getting closer, and the way technology moves so quick. Because, we remember back, if you go back to like Charles Spurgeon, like I'm sure when he was reading through this stuff, he didn't know how, but there is going to be a day when the Antichrist will have this power, and we're actually living it. We're actually seeing the foundation being laid for that to take place, which is exciting.
For sure.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, I'd rather go back to Charles Spurgeon Day because it was a much simpler time. But we are moving forward, and we don't know what lies ahead, but we know we can trust our Lord, and He'll take care.
I think for us, I think the best thing to do is, enjoy the things of life that the gifts of life that God has given, so enjoy friends and family, and enjoy, going out and walking in the grass, and, seeing the trees and the birds, and enjoy the sky, and, all that is, all the things that God has provided for us as good things, and, enjoy a company of good friends, enjoy the, food, and, within, moderation. And, I think those are the things that, hug a baby, hold a baby, hug a child, kind of thing. And so I think those are the things that are going to bring us true joy in the midst of all of this. And so it's not all bad. It's a good thing in some ways. It's scary, but it can be scary, but knowing that God is providential through it all, and He's not going to allow anything to happen that He doesn't ordain to happen. And, and that He's still giving people, us through it all. They're still going to, it's funny because Jesus said there's still going to be, marriages, that weddings that are going on right up until the end, right up until He returns. And so, we can still enjoy that. I take that to mean that, there's still going to be life going on even through all this. And so, yes, it'll be heavily affected, but there will be some aspects that we can still enjoy. And obviously we ultimately find our joy in the Lord. So even through this, there's no reason to despair, especially as a Christian, because Christ is going to return, right? We know that. And because even through this, we can have some level of joy, in life, but we can also have our ultimate joy in Him.
Yes, I agree with that. I can't say that any better, so I don't think I will. Yeah, we live in strange times, and we'll see what lies ahead. Interesting, but
yeah, it was the best of times. It was the worst of times.
Man, you should put that down in a book somewhere.
Yeah, it's a great line.
It is. Yeah, it is. It's and that is kind of what we live in. It sums it up well, because we don't know what lies ahead, but we do know who knows what is coming.
But we know the one who knows.
Yes, that's what I was trying to say. That's why it's the best of times is the worst of times, like you just said.
Yep.
Well, is that what it was? The worst of times?
It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. I think that's the order. It is.
Yes.
The book.
So
that was not my quote. In case somebody doesn't know that.
That's Charles Dickens?
Yeah, Charles Dickens, I think. It's The Tale of Two Cities.
Tale of the Twin Cities?
The Tale of Two Cities. Twin Cities is in Minnesota.
That's what I thought. It was Minneapolis, St. Paul. He wrote that about.
Yeah, he wrote it about Minneapolis, St. Paul. A Tale of Two Cities, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, is the first line in the novel.
Okay, there you go.
And it was actually set in the French Revolution. So,
okay.
So there's some parallels even to where we are today. So
yeah, and if I were you, I would try not. I hope they don't build that data center in Alachua, but we'll see.
Yeah, I would definitely vote against it if it comes to a vote.
I'd rather stay as far away from those things as I can, but. You've been listening to Fresh Bread, podcast ministry of Grace Bible Church Gainesville. For more information, go to gracegainesville.org. And thanks for listening.